Over the years, Pixar has given us plenty of reasons to watch their movies, be it their stunning animation, brilliant storytelling, and timeless characters. But that last point also extends into another great thing about Pixar, its villains.
Where are your rebel friends now?
Next to Disney's own Rogues Gallery, Pixar has one of the best villains rosters ever imagined and are still capable of pushing the envelope 25 years later.
So play nice.
But what happens when you put this collection of supervillains, terrorists, and spiteful commentators in the same room? Some will rise up as the apex of Pixar villainy, and others won't even seem that bad in comparison.
Listen, don't you worry, pal. You had a good run.
So, let's find out. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is Pixar Villains, Evil to Most Evil.
And I'll silence anyone who gets in my way!
Okay, so considering the wide scope of baddies across Pixar's library, it's vital that we establish some rules. We're going to be focusing almost exclusively on main antagonists from each movie, only including a few secondary antagonists if they have enough of an impact on the plot. For example, we're not going to include Zurg and Utility Belt Buzz from Toy Story 2. Because they're very minor obstacles in the bigger picture of that movie. It's also worth noting that not every movie has a main antagonist. To elaborate, neither Finding Dory or Inside Out have a central bad guy, so we're just gonna go ahead and avoid those two movies for the sake of this list. We'll be judging villains based on negative character traits, their list of crimes, their evil plans, and their body count, if they have one. Starting out on the less evil side, we have the only character on this list who we would argue is actually a good man, Dr. Sherman, the dentist from Finding Nemo.
Hello, little fella.
In the confines of the movie, we can certainly see why we're not supposed to like the guy. From the perspective of Marlin, he's a kidnapper, and from the perspective of the Tank Gang, he's an obstacle that constantly finds a way to ruin their escape plans. With context, however, there's not much to fault him for. From his perspective, he saved Nemo thinking that he was struggling for life outside the reef. He's a good dentist, a responsible pet owner who genuinely cares and shows concern for his fish, and really, who wouldn't react the way he does if a pelican barged into your room the way Nigel did? The worst thing that we can say about the guy is that he has no issues giving fish as a present to his incapable niece. But even then, you could argue he's just trying to be a nice uncle. Really, if Sherman knew that fish were truly sentient, we believe that he would let the fish go in a heartbeat. Okay, on to some actual bad characters. The first of which is Team Roar Omega Roar from Monsters University.
Release the stuffed animals.
No college film with a battle of the fraternities would be complete without the stereotypical popular, preppy, but downright nasty frat squad, and that describes these guys perfectly.
Oh, sorry, killer, but you might want to hang out with someone a little more your speed.
They act as the rival team to Uzma Kappa and consist of some of Monster University's best and brightest scarers.
After you lose, no one will remember you.
That said, they aren't that evil. Barring some standard jerk behavior, which is pretty tame by the standards of this list, the worst thing that they do is publicly humiliate OK in an attempt to get them to drop out, but that's not the worst thing in the grand scheme of villainy. Another jerk competitor, Cars 3 Jackson Storm, is up next. Jackson Storm is the parallel of Lightning as he was in the first movie.
You have no idea what a pleasure it is for me to finally beat you.
But where McQueen showed genuine admiration for racers like Hudson and the King, Storm looks down upon the older generation and will act any way he needs to emotionally manipulate his competition into giving up, or making bad moves going from patronizing to passive-aggressive faster than his own remarkable top speed.
Don't you worry, pal. You had a good run. Enjoy your retirement.
We ranked him a tad bit worse than ROR simply because he was willing to get physical when his normal tactics failed, but it wasn't long before Lightning's pupil, Cruz, showed him up. Next is the original Pixar villain, Sid Phillips. If you've seen our Evil to Most Evil on Disney Villains, you may remember we actually included Sid as one of the few Pixar villains on the list, and you'll know that we ranked him as a pretty tame villain. But for those who didn't see that video, Sid is far from the most evil Pixar villain for the same reasons as Dr. Sherman. From a toy's perspective, Sid's very name strikes fear, and there's no better way for him to spend his free time than torturing and mutilating whatever plaything he can get his hands on.
Once we go into Sid's house, we won't be coming out.
With context, however, Sid really isn't that bad. He doesn't know he's actually inflicting pain on sentient beings. But there are plenty of other reasons as to why he's a bad egg. On top of having exceptionally violent fantasies, he also has anger issues, bullies around his sister,
Whatever she says, it's not true!
seems to be antisocial as he doesn't have a single friend besides his terrifying dog,
Ready, set, now!
and doesn't seem to have that much regard for public property.
Take that!
With that said, there's also a counter-argument that Sid might have a bad home life. You can't tell me that Scud, a dog straight out of hell, wouldn't willingly leave Buzz alone at the very sight of Sid's father asleep with a whimper unless he had some awful experiences with him in the past. And that's on top of the sheer amount of locks that Sid has on his door. Maybe Sid is a victim of an abusive father whose sadistic treatment of toys is a means of escapism and anger relief, which actually shows him in a way more sympathetic light. From the first Toy Story to the last, we now have Gabby. Alright, so trying to take Woody's voice box by force is pretty bad.
I just want to talk.
Yeah, with my voice box.
So is bargaining Forky's safety for the voice box and using all of Woody's memories with Andy that she got from Forky to convince him into giving it up.
Just leave me, Forky. Bonnie needs him.
She's a tad bit unsettling, and her creepy ventriloquist dummy henchmen don't really help matters. That said, she only wanted to be loved by a kid and knew that her busted voice box would kill her chances. After Gabby gets what she wants though, she holds her end of the bargain and even offers Woody back his voice box when Harmony rejects her.
You can have your voice box back.
She does ultimately redeem herself and get what she wants by comforting a lost little girl. And it's also worth noting that of all the characters on this list that start out evil, she's the only one that turns truly good by the end, which does push her pretty significantly towards the less evil end of the spectrum. Chick Hicks, runner-up racer veteran, is up next.
Former and forever Piston Cup champion, Chick Hicks.
Compared to Storm, Chick's methods of dealing with opposition on the racetrack is almost hilariously blunt. Where Jackson was a master of manipulation but played fair otherwise, Chick is just a dirty cheater.
But what do you think of this?
He caused a massive pileup to try and delay lightning and intentionally sideswiped the king,
I am not coming in behind you again, old man.
leading to one of the most horrific crashes from any of the Cars movies. He's just a spiteful, bitter racer who deserved every boo that he got. The Good Dinosaurs pterodactyl gang leader, Thunderclap, is next.
You can call me Thunderclap.
How do you make a truly reprehensible villain in a dinosaur movie? The answer is, you really can't. The worst you've got is a carnivore that just wants to eat the main characters for survival. And sorry to be real for a moment, but that's just nature. Thunderclap is certainly a brutal carnivore. That scene of him eating the living, adorable raccoon whole will haunt our dreams for a while. But hey, dinos gotta eat. Much like the movie he comes from, Thunderclap isn't really that memorable, so we're better off just moving on. Steering wheel of the Axiom, Otto, rounds out the last of our lesser evils. Otto does deserve the distinction for causing the most severe damage to a protagonist between tasing his power source and forcing the plant identifier to crush Wally into nearly irreparable scrap. He's also thrown both Wally and Eve down the garbage chute with the intention to throw both out to their doom, and got pretty physical with the captain.
You're not getting away from me.
At the same time though, he's only following Directive A113 given to him by BNL's president.
Give me the plan.
In his own words, he's just following his directive. Sure, he pulls plenty of tricks, but it's all in service of his unbiased, unemotional programming. So we can't really hold too much against him given it's a machine. The owner of Al's Toy Barn, the Chicken Man, Al, is next. He stole Woody from a yard sale after Andy's mom stressed that he wasn't for sale and planned on selling him along with the rest of his Woody's Roundup merchandise to make a lot of money.
Gonna make me big bucks.
I'm not one to shame the collector's lifestyle, but you've got to be a total scumbag to pull something like that. He also treats other people like garbage, as evidenced by how he goes off on the airport staff and unceremoniously shoves the poor old toy repairman.
The contents of that case are worth more than you make in a year.
If we could say anything nice about him, he's got a pretty catchy commercial slogan, but that's about it.
Everything for a buck.
Okay, now we're getting into some really bad guys, starting with Mr. Waternoose. Considering the monster world's constant struggle with something as serious as a power crisis, you can almost see where Waternoose is coming from. He's an aging CEO of a huge but struggling company that's been passed down by his family from generation to generation and only wants to keep it alive.
I would do anything to keep it from going under.
This desperation caused him to strip away his morals and team up with Randall to kidnap children for the sake of stealing their screams.
I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die.
It's a screwed up plan, and while he did genuinely like both Mike and Sully as they were the best in the business, he still had no qualms banishing them once they knew too much.
You'll have the child and the criminals responsible for this whole mess.
Really, Waternoose was probably a great CEO for a long time, but his own pride and devotion to the company caused him to grow corrupt. Next up is Stinky Pete. The bait-and-switch villain of Toy Story 2, Stinky Pete at first seems like a calm, wise mediator between Woody and Jessie. Once Woody decides to leave, however, the prospector reveals his true colors. He's a spiteful old toy who hates space toys for making the Woody's Roundup franchise die off, and switches gears from subtle emotional manipulation to straight-up violence once he deems the time for being reasonable is over.
Once the astronauts went up, children only wanted to play with space toys.
And threatening to tear Woody apart piece by piece if he didn't come to Japan peacefully.
You can go to Japan together or in pieces.
Not even Lotso made a threat like that. The only reason he isn't ranked any higher is that he probably wouldn't have revealed his true colors if Woody hadn't had the last second change of heart. I mean, he might have been an amicable guy in that museum, but it just wasn't meant to be. Plus, you gotta feel for him given all that time he spent being passed over on the shelf. Damn space toys. Big bad chef of Ratatouille, Chef Skinner, is up next. Chef and right-hand man to beloved Chef Gusteau until his depression-induced death, Skinner is a far cry from Gusteau in terms of both ideals and goals.
What?
How dare you hire someone without my permission?
Gusteau was a warm presence in his own kitchen, had a firm belief that anyone could cook, and pursued his career out of a love for the art of cooking itself.
But only the fearless can be great.
Skinner, meanwhile, is an angry, overbearing dictator of a head chef, spreading doubt and negativity wherever he goes. No wonder why Gusteau's was on the decline while this guy was in charge. And that's not even factoring in his besmirching of Gusteau's good name by using his recognition to create a line of frozen food products to profit off a dead man's notoriety.
I want you to work up something for my latest frozen food concept.
Once he lost Gusteau's to Linguini, Gusteau's biological son, he proceeds to do everything in his power to get the place shut down and even captures Remy and makes a simple deal. Create a new frozen food empire for him, or die. What a sicko. Okay, next is Up's unhinged adventurer, Charles Muntz.
Adventure is out there!
Much like Waternoose, Muntz's descent into villainy is pretty disheartening. He was a beloved and respected worldwide explorer who lost all of his acclaim and credibility when scientists believed that the skeleton of a gigantic bird he had brought back was fake.
The National Explorers Society accuses Muntz of fabricating the skeleton.
Muntz swore that he would come back with a living specimen or never come back at all. Cut to 70 years later, and the man is still on the hunt. He had gotten to the point where he had killed 2 innocent explorers soon after meeting them out of paranoia that they were after the bird too, and even kept their pilot helmets as trophies. Besides his dogs, Muntz doesn't seem to care about anyone else at this point and will go to any extreme to kill Carl and Russell and capture the bird. This includes sending his army of vicious attack dogs to rip them to shreds, going after Carl with a sword, hunting down the group with a gun, and leaving a tied-up Russell to plummet to his death. It's pretty dark, even by Pixar standards. We'll give him this much though. Muntz has spent 70 years in isolation, tracking a bird that is the ticket to getting his fame and status back, and is now at least 90 years old. Those circumstances would drive anyone insane out of obsession, and it makes the steps, precautions, and countermeasures he takes to snatch and keep the bird very logical. They just happen to be morally reprehensible. Sure, going after a child with a shotgun after attempting to let him fall to his death is not justifiable in the slightest, but at least you can make a solid argument for why he does.
Nice talking with you.
I don't think anyone will argue that Randall Boggs is a much greater evil between him and Waternoose. Randall used to be a kind-hearted, socially awkward nerd, but after spending time with ROR and embarrassing himself during the last event of the Scare Games unintentionally caused by Sully, Randall became a much different monster.
That's the last time I lose to you, Sullivan.
Cut to Monsters Inc., where Randall is the second best scarer in the company, only beaten by Sully.
May the best monster win.
I plan to.
He despises how he's constantly outdone by Sully and treats both him and Mike with a lot of callous. He bullies around his scare assistant, Fungus, and doesn't seem to value him even when he's being subjected to the Scream Extractor.
I will personally put you through the shredder!
Oh yeah, the Scream Extractor. He invented this awful machine that forcibly sucks screams out of the victim, leaving them a pale, empty husk, as a means of revolutionizing Monsters Inc. And finally outdoing Sully, and with Waternoose's begrudging approval, he was allowed to start putting his plan into action. And while Waternoose clearly only went with the plan out of a desperation to combat the energy crisis, Randall is definitely enjoying this way more than he should.
And with this machine, we won't need scares.
Look at this evil grin as Boo is about to get her screams extracted. That's a sociopath right there. As for violence, he nearly breaks Mike's arms, tries to torture Mike with the Scream Extractor for information, nearly chokes Sully to death, tries to kill both of them by dropping a door that shattered upon impact, and comes close to killing Sully by kicking him off a door.
I'll take good care of the kid.
Wow, he deserves every shovel swing he got and then some.
Navigator, give me that shovel. Come here.
Coco's main baddie, Ernesto de la Cruz, is living proof, or undead proof, that Pixar can still make an excellent antagonist. It seems like Cruz is the kind of guy everyone wants to be. Handsome, successful, a real crowd pleaser, and an all-around nice guy. But that's only the side of him he wants you to see.
All of this came from my amazing fans in the land of the living.
In life, Cruz was the musical partner and guitarist to his childhood friend and songwriter, Hector Rivera. They had a real shot at glory, but Hector decided to turn it down because he wanted to return home to see his little girl again. One poisoned tequila shot later, and Ernesto has become a musical sensation across Mexico by passing off the songs as his own. The fact he was willing to betray his best friend for fame and fortune, and was perfectly fine with him suffering his final death and being lost forever to preserve his own image, absolutely makes him a psychopath. And unlike most other villains, it's a very personal blow.
You're being forgotten.
He also tries to kill Miguel for exposing his crimes.
I am the one who's willing to do what it takes to seize my moment.
And while we're getting alarmingly used to child abuse and attempted murder at this point, it's no less of a reason to stick him even closer towards the more evil end of the Pixar pantheon. Okay, we're finally on to our first of the Incredibles representatives. From the sequel, Evelyn. We don't even know how to open up this can of worms, so we're just gonna list off all the horrible deeds she does to prove her placement. Her goal is to have superheroes outlawed forever, and to do so she became a master hacker and learned how to mind control others.
You're gonna help me make supers illegal forever.
Under her alias, the Screenslaver, she uses both monitors and her trademark mind control goggles to relay her message and force unwilling supers to do her bidding.
You are no longer in control. I am.
She hypnotizes and frames a pizza delivery guy to throw off Elastigirl. She takes control of Helen, Bob, Lucius, and all the supers her brother Winston had invited in a matter of days. She planned to abandon all the in-limbo supers and foreign diplomats on a runaway boat that would have crashed into the city and killed everyone on board. And she has no issues letting Elastigirl die from a lack of oxygen when she attempted to apprehend her.
Don't wanna die? Nobody does.
And she does all this with a straight face and complete apathy in her voice. That said, Deaver does at least have a relatively solid motive for her crimes. Her father was gunned down in their own home during a robbery because he wanted to phone for his super friends to save the day instead of hiding in his house's safe room. Unfortunately, the supers he called had gone underground at the time.
Father insisted they call his superhero friends. He died.
She genuinely believes that supers make the citizens weaker, more complacent, and she wants them to be illegal forever, so that people can become more self-reliant.
Superheroes keep us weak.
So basically Lex Luthor, but with a lot less kryptonite and a lot more coffee. As the most evil villain of the Cars series, we have Miles Axelrod from Cars 2. Cars 2 is a strange mess with some pretty out there plot points, but we'll give it this. It had a pretty interesting antagonist.
How did the tow truck figure it out?
A supposedly charming, eccentric, and stupidly rich electric car who organizes a world Grand Prix with the plan to make alternative fuel look bad, so cars will flock back to gasoline, where he and his fellow outdated lemon cars have the greatest supply of untapped oil reserves, allowing them to reap massive profits.
After today, everyone will race back to gasoline.
As the head honcho of his criminal organization, Miles is essentially a terrorist. He's organized the murder of a handful of secret agents and tried to have Lightning McQueen killed. Oh, and as a last resort, he planted a voice-activated bomb on Matter with the intention of blowing him and Lightning into pieces. Okay, now that we've reached the top of the top, we'll preface this by saying that these evildoers are in their own league compared to the rest, and you could make a convincing argument for any of these guys being Pixar's most irredeemable villain. That said, we do have to try and put them in some order, starting with Lotso Huggenbear from Toy Story 3. Is there anything new to say about Sunnyside's sinister dictator at this point? Everyone who's seen the movie knows how awful he is. Because he got replaced by his owner when he was thought to be lost, Lotso became a toy that was driven solely by anger and sadism, who thought that no toy deserves love and all toys are just destined to end up in the trash.
We're all just trash, waiting to be thrown away.
He took over Sunnyside Daycare and turned it into a prison with harsh punishments for attempts at leaving, and even those who are only guilty by association aren't safe.
I'm sorry, cowboy. They broke me.
He manipulates and lies to his henchmen, switches Buzz's mode to make him another one of his enforcers, and has him beat up his own friends. He also condemns Ken to death the moment he speaks out against him. The most evil moment, however, is one of the absolute best moments for any Pixar villain. Woody and Buzz save his sorry pink butt from being shredded at the dump. They give him a boost to a button that'll turn off the conveyor belts that the rest of Andy's toys are running for their lives on. And then,
where's your kid now, Sheriff?
He sticks to his old ways and leaves them to perish in the incinerator. And based on that sadistic look on his face, he's more than happy to do so. Lotso, you are a complete cuddly monster. Now, the bronze medal of Pixar villainy is for Mordu, the evil bear from Brave. He was once one of the 4 princes who had inherited an equal claim to his father's throne. Out of a desire to claim it all for himself, he ingested a potion that would give him the strength of 10 men, and the result that nobody saw coming.
He demanded I give him the strength of 10 men.
He transformed into an instinct-driven, monstrous 15-foot tall black bear who slaughtered each of his brothers. And the rest is history. His scarred back houses dozens of arrows and blades, representing only a small portion of the warriors he's ended during his massive killing spree across Scotland. Between that and all the bones found at the old castle ruins, Mordu very likely has the largest body count of any Pixar villain. Most importantly, the prince himself is not in control of his actions, and so unlike every other antagonist, he shows no fear whatsoever and attacks any challenger head-on with raging hostility and blind hatred. When the bear is finally put down, the prince's spirit does emerge and gives a thankful nod to both Merida and Eleanor for finally killing his furry prison and releasing him. But sorry dude, you killed and devoured hundreds, possibly thousands of people during the few centuries you were roaming the country, all because you wanted more political power. No amount of nodding is going to fix that. Now, the silver medal for evil goes to Hopper.
Do I look stupid to you?
It's kinda sad. It feels like A Bug's Life is slowly being forgotten by the general public as newer films come out, despite this film having some real sparks of brilliance.
I'm lost! Where's the line?
The best of them being its villain, Hopper, the leader of the Grasshopper gang that bully around and constantly put demands on the ant colony. Much like later villains such as Skinner and Randall, Hopper makes no real attempt to hide his true nature. He uses a mixture of intimidation, fear tactics, and false compassion to keep the ants in line.
Hopper.
And his sheer size, strength, and brutality allows him to dominate any one-on-one encounter with an individual bug. Of course, if he didn't already summon the feral Thumper to curb stomp them.
You don't like Thumper?
Despite this, Hopper is way smarter than he looks. He knows the ants could easily overwhelm them with numbers, and gives an accurate portrayal of this by crushing 3 of his own under an avalanche of grain. He terrifies his own gang, and the only reason he hasn't killed his brother is because he made a promise to his dying mother.
If I hadn't promised Mother on her deathbed that I wouldn't kill you.
He came close to having Princess Dot, a young child, hurt by Thumper to make an example. And when the ants weren't able to provide twice their usual offer, he planned to kill the queen and take all the food by force, leaving the rest of the colony to starve to death.
Guess what? You just lost.
What sinks Hopper so much lower than most of his competition is that the movie doesn't even make an attempt to give him an excuse for being evil. He's just a selfish, violent, and malicious vermin from start to finish. For you avid Pixar fans, you should know who we've saved for last. The Incredibles' original supervillain, Syndrome.
I'm Syndrome, your nemesis at it!
Buddy Pines was a super fanatic and desired nothing more than to be one himself. He wanted to wear a cool costume, beat up bad guys, and become wildly popular. But even from that point in his life, Buddy seemed to ignore the main reason any of his super idols became heroes: to help others and save the innocent.
All I wanted was to help you.
I only wanted to help!
This little misconception, along with the anger for Mr. Incredible for constantly turning him down as a sidekick due to his lack of training and annoying presence, gave birth to one of the greatest villains across Disney's entire empire.
You can't count on anyone, especially your heroes.
Syndrome's plan was to become a super himself, and every step he takes to get there tops the last for how straight up wrong and terrible it is. Step 1, create high-tech weapons and equipment and sell that to anyone twisted enough to buy his products, meaning he was probably selling to criminals at best and corrupt governments and terrorist groups at worst.
How do you think I got rich? I invented weapons.
Step 2, use those funds to create a prototype of an ultimate battle droid that learns with every encounter and can go toe-to-toe with supers and win. Send in retired supers one by one, where the robot kills the super or the super destroys the robot, and Syndrome upgrades it and gives it the previous droid's memories to kill them in round 2. This eventually leads to him beating and incarcerating Mr. Incredible. Step 3, send in this now practically unstoppable Omnidroid to tear apart a city, murder some civilians, and take down any military resistance just so this new super, Syndrome, can fly in and save the day.
I'm Syndrome!
That totally didn't backfire on him. Step 4, live the super life he always wanted until he gets bored and sells his inventions to any average Joe because, in his own words,
and when everyone's super,
no one will be.
Even ignoring his masterfully created plan and absolute unit of a robot, he's got almost every evil card that every previous Pixar villain has had and has no problem rubbing it in your face. He's committed mass murder, tortures people with electrocution, has no moral dilemma with trying to kill children, attempts kidnapping, is a massive egomaniac, tries to pose as a good person in the public's eye, and doesn't even value his own cohorts.
I'll crush her.
Oh, that sounds a little dark for you. Now, go ahead.
Beyond all that though, Syndrome not only acknowledges that he's evil, but takes a twisted amount of pride and joy in it.
After all,
I am your biggest fan.
Alright buddy, you want to be the bad guy so badly? How about you die like one? Disagree with us? Let us know in the comments. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the morality spectrum of your favorite shows and movies. But most importantly, stay wicked.